Welcome to Warhammer 40k 8th edition Battle Report 15, 1850 points, Death Guard versus Tzeentch. We will be playing the chapter approved Maelstrom of War mission kill confirmed today with a random map deployment. Let's start by taking a look at the board and where the objectives have been placed. So starting with this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have objective marker 4. Then in this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have objective marker 3. The third and final section on this side of the board is this 2 foot by 2 foot section with objective marker 1 right here. Starting on the other side of the board, we have this 2 foot by 2 foot section with objective marker 5 right here. Moving over to this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have objective marker 2 right here. And then finally in this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have objective marker 6 right here. At the start of the game, thanks to Kairos Fateweaver being the warlord for the Tzeentch army, the Tzeentch army will get plus D3 command points for this game. And here's the roll. And that symbol is a 6, so they will have plus 3 command points for this game for a total of 9, and the Death Guard will have 6 command points. And now we will roll for the random deployment map that the armies will be playing on today. And here's the roll. Getting a 2, which is Dawn of War. And so now we will roll for which army will deploy on which side of the map. On a 1, 2, or 3, the Death Guard will deploy on the left and Tzeentch will deploy on the right. And on a 4, 5, or 6, they will deploy on the opposite sides. And so here's that roll. Getting a 3, so the Death Guard will deploy on the left and Tzeentch will deploy on the right. And so now, on a roll of a 1, 2, or a 3, the Death Guard will begin deploying first. On a 4, 5, or 6, Tzeentch will begin deploying first. And that's a 6, so Tzeentch will begin deploying first. We will be back after the deployment. The armies have now finished deploying onto the battlefield. Tzeentch began deploying first, but Death Guard finished deploying first. So Death Guard will go first unless Tzeentch is able to seize the initiative. Let's take a look at where the army's deployed, starting with the Death Guard. So starting on the left of their deployment, they have the 1st Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings, the 2nd Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings, the 1st squad of Nurgling Swarms, the Warlord Mortarion, the Chaos Land Raider with the squad of Plague Marines, the Malignant Plague Caster, the Tallyman, and the Plague Surgeon all embarked inside, the Plague Burst Crawler right here, and then the 2nd and final squad of Nurgling Swarms. Then over in the Tzeentch deployment zone, starting on their left as well, we have the 1st squad of Pink Horrors, then the Tzeentch Warlord, Kairos Fateweaver, the 1st Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, the 2nd squad of Pink Horrors. This squad is the one with the instrument and the icon. The 2nd Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, Magnus the Red, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, and the final 3rd squad of Pink Horrors. So now Tzeentch will attempt to steal the initiative, and they will need a 6, and they failed to get it. So let's go into Death Guard, turn 1. Going into Death Guard turn 1, a reminder that the Death Guard have 6 command points, and Tzeentch has 9 command points. The Death Guard began by drawing 3 new tactical objective cards, and they drew Overwhelming Firepower, score 1 victory point if an enemy unit was destroyed during the shooting phase of your turn. If 3 or more enemy units were destroyed during the shooting phase of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. Secure Objective 3, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 3 is this one right here, currently being held by this Plague Burst Crawler and this Chaos Land Raider. And finally, Secure Objective 5, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 5 is this one right here, currently being held by this squad of Pink Horrors and also close to Kairos Fateweaver. So going into the movement phase, this squad of Nurgling Swarms is going to move up the board a couple of inches just to better hold Objective Marker 1. And they will finish their movement right here, so that now all 3 Nurgling Swarms are within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 1. This Plague Burst Crawler is going to remain still. This Chaos Land Raider is going to move 6 inches up the board over in this direction so that its Combi Bolter is within 24-inch range of Kairos Fateweaver. And the Chaos Land Raider will finish its movement right here. This squad of Nurgling Swarms is going to move up the board a couple of inches to be closer and in better holding position of objective marker 4. And they will finish their movement right here. Next, this Demon Prince is going to move up the board 12 inches. And it will finish its movement right here. And now this Demon Prince of Nurgle will also move up the board 12 inches. And it will finish its movement right here. Finally, Mortarion is going to move 12 inches over to this direction. And Mortarion will finish his movement right here. So, going into the Psychic phase, we will start with this Demon Prince of Nurgle casting Curse of the Leper onto this squad of pink horrors, and one of the models is just within 14 inches of that Demon Prince. So, Curse the Leper has a warp charge value of 7, so here's the dice roll, and fails with a 3. And the Death Guard do not have any rerolls, specifically for Psychic powers, and so that will fail to go off. The other Demon Prince will now attempt to cast Smite onto the same squad of pink horrors. And Smite has a warp charge value of 5, and he gets it with a 5. The pink horrors, since they are the target, will attempt to deny the witch, but they only get to roll 1 dice, so they are looking for a 6. And they do not get it, so Smite will go off. It will do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. And so 2 pink horrors will go down, leaving 8 left. Finally, Mortarion is going to attempt to cast Miasma of Pestilence and Blades of Putrefaction onto himself. So starting with Miasma of Pestilence, which has a warp charge value of 6. And he gets it with a 6. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will attempt to deny the witch since he is within 24 inches of Mortarion. And he does get to add 2 to this roll, and so he gets a deny the witch value of 10. So Miasma of Pestilence will not go off. So finally, Mortarion will attempt to manifest Blades of Putrefaction onto himself, which has a warp charge value of 5, and he gets it with a 7. The Lord of Change will also attempt to deny this one, adding 2 to the result, and he denies it with an 11. So Blades of Putrefaction will also not go off. So going into the shooting phase, the Death Guard will start with their Plague Burst Crawler, firing everything it has into Kairos Fateweaver. And at the beginning of the Death Guard shooting phase, Tzeentch is going to use the stratagem Warp Surge for 2 command points, which will drop Tzeentch from 9 down to 7. Use this stratagem at the start of any phase, select a unit of demons. Until the end of that phase, you cannot reroll saving throws for this unit, but its invulnerable save is improved by 1 to a maximum of 3 up, and they will use that on Kairos Fateweaver. So Kairos Fateweaver will have an invulnerable save of 3 up. So the Plague Burst Crawler will start with its Heavy Slugger, 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 4 hits, wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound, 1 3-up invulnerable save, which passes. So next, the 2 Entropy Cannons, 2 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, and both fail to wound. Finally, the Plague Burst Mortar, D6 shots, only getting 1 shot. The Death Guard are going to use 1 command point, going from 6 down to 5 in order to use a command reroll to reroll that dice roll. So rerolling the number of shots, and now getting 5 shots. Hitting on 4s. Getting 5 hits, wounding on 3s, only getting 2 wounds, 2 3-up invulnerable saves, and both fail. And I do apologize, but when rolled to wound, there were 2 1s in the wound rolls, and those get to be re-rolled because it is a plague weapon. So, re-rolling the 2 1s on the wound rolls, still both failed to wound, so it didn't make a difference. But the 2 that did go through got past the invulnerable save, and so they will do D3 damage apiece. So 2 D3 damage for a total of 3 damage. And so the Warlord, Kairos Fateweaver, will drop from 16 starting wounds down to 13 left. Now this Land Raider is going to fire everything it has into Kairos Fateweaver. Starting with the Combi Bolter, since it's just within 24-inch range, 2 shots hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots hitting on 3s, only getting 2 hits, wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. So finally, the 2 Twin Last Cannons, 4 shots hitting on 3s, getting a very bad hit roll with only one hit. Wounding on a 3. And it fails to wound. That was a lot of ones. And Mortarion is not within 18 inches of anyone, so he cannot shoot the lantern. And there is no one within 12 inches, so going into the assault phase, there are no charges to declare, which means there's nothing to resolve in the fight phase. However, going into the morale phase, this squad of pink horrors did lose 2 models this turn. And pink horrors have a leadership of 7, so on a roll of a 6, they lose 1 more model, and they do, of course. So 1 more pink horror will go down, leaving 7 left. So, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Death Guard failed to achieve overwhelming firepower. They did, however, secure Objective 3 for 1 victory point, but they failed to secure Objective 5. And the Death Guard are going to throw away secure Objective 5, since Objective 5 is in the Tzeentch deployment zone, or at least right next to it. And so at the end of Death Guard turn 1, the score currently sits at 1 victory point for the Death Guard and 0 victory points for Tzeentch. So going into Tzeentch turn 1, a reminder that Tzeentch has 7 command points and the Death Guard have 5 command points. And so at the start of Tzeentch turn 1, they began by drawing 3 new tactical objective cards, and they drew Secure Objective 2, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 2 at the end of your turn. Objective Marker 2 is right here, currently being controlled by a group of pink horrors. Secure Objective 5, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of your turn. Objective Marker 5 is right here, currently being controlled by this group of pink horrors. And secure Objective 6. Score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 6 at the end of your turn. And I think this must have been the luckiest tactical objective card draw ever, because Objective Marker 6 is right here, currently being held by this squad of pink horrors. And so as long as those pink horrors are still controlling those objectives at the end of the turn, all 3 of those tactical objective cards will be achieved this turn. So going into the movement phase, this squad of pink horrors is going to shuffle around a little bit just to get a better shot on the demon princes that attempted to manifest psychic powers on them the previous turn. And they will finish their movement like so. This Lord of Change is now going to move up the board up to 12 inches, and he will finish his movement right here. Now Magnus the Red will move up the board 12 inches right next to the Lord of Change. And I apologize for misspeaking, as Magnus is still at full health, he still has 16 inches of possible movement, and so he moved right to here. This Soul Grinder is going to remain still. This squad of pink horrors is going to remain still. This Soul Grinder will also remain still. Kairos Fate Weaver is going to move 12 inches up the board. And Kairos will finish his movement right here. And finally, this squad of pink horrors will remain still. Going into the psychic phase for Tzeentch turn 1, Tzeentch will begin by using the stratagem Locus of Conjuration for 2 command points, which will drop them from 7 down to 5 left. Use this stratagem at the start of your psychic phase. Select a Tzeentch demon character from your army. Until the end of the phase, you can reroll any failed psychic tests made for friendly Tzeentch demon units within 6 inches of this model. And so Tzeentch will select the Lord of Change with the Impossible Robe and Baleful Sword as the target, which means that Magnus will benefit since he's within 6 inches. And thanks to their reshuffling, this squad of pink horrors will also benefit. And so we will start in the psychic phase with this squad of pink horrors casting Smite onto this demon prince because it is the closest visible enemy unit. So looking for a 5 or a 6, and they fail, but thanks to Locus of Conjuration, they do get to reroll. And here's the reroll, still failing to get it off. Next, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword is going to cast Boon of Change onto Magnus, and he will cast Smite onto the Demon Prince that the Pink Horrors were targeting because it is still the closest visible enemy unit. So, starting with Smite, gets it with an 11 thanks to his Psychic Test bonus. So the Demon Prince that is not the target will attempt to deny the Witch and needs a 12 and fails to get it. And because it was an 11, it does D6 mortal wounds, doing just 1 mortal wound. Tzeentch will use 1 command point, going from 5 down to 4 left, to use a command reroll in order to reroll that 1. So rerolling the d6 mortal wounds and causing 5 mortal wounds. So 5 disgustingly resilient rolls and passes 2, failing 3. And so this Demon Prince will drop from 8 starting wounds down to 5 left. Now for Boon of Change onto Magnus, which has a warp charge value of 7, and he gets it with an 8. So now the closer Demon Prince, the one that just took mortal wounds from Smite, will attempt to deny the Witch, needing at least a 9, and fails by getting an 8 as well. So it will go off, and now we roll on the table, getting a 4, which is Mystic Strength plus 1 Strength. So Magnus will now have a base strength of 9. Magnus the Red will now attempt to manifest Warp Time onto himself. Warp Time has a warp charge value of 6, and re-rolling the 1 thanks to himself, which means he fails, but he gets to re-roll the 2 then, thanks to Locus of Conjuration from the Lord of Change. So he passes with a 7, which becomes a 9, thanks to his Psychic Test bonus. So Mortarion will attempt to deny the Witch, and fails to do so. This means that Magnus will be able to move again normally, as if it were the movement phase. And so Magnus moved right to here, and he is just over an inch away from Mortarion and from the Demon Prince of Nurgle. However, he is slightly closer to Mortarion for the purpose of targeting. And because of that, Magnus is now going to attempt to manifest Smite onto Mortarion with a warp charge value of 5, and he gets it with a 9, thanks to his Psychic Test bonus. Mortarion will attempt to deny the Witch, and he fails to do so with an 8. Because Magnus is special, he has d6 mortal wounds with Smite, and then 2d6 if it's more than 11. So d6 mortal wounds, causing just 1. So 1 disgustingly resilient roll, which fails. So Mortarion will drop from 18 starting wounds down to 17 left. So finally, for Magnus, he will attempt to manifest Death Hex onto Mortarion, which has a warp charge value of 8, and he gets it with a 10. So Mortarion will attempt to deny the Witch, and he fails with a 5. So Mortarion will not be able to take invuln saves until the start of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase. Finally, in the Psychic phase, Kairos Fateweaver is going to attempt to manifest Smite, Bolt of Change, and Infernal Gateway onto this squad of Nurgling Swarms, starting with Infernal Gateway because this Nurgling Swarm is just within 12 inches of Kairos Fateweaver. And the Death Guard will not have any more Deny the Witch abilities for the rest of this Psychic phase, since they used them all already. So starting with Infernal Gateway, which has a warp charge value of 8, and he gets it with a 9. Thanks to his Psychic Test bonus. So 3 mortal wounds, D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 3 mortal wounds. 3 disgustingly resilient rolls, and fail all 3. And so 1 Nurgling Swarm will go from 4 starting wounds down to 1 left. Now for Smite, gets it with a 7. D3 mortal wounds, and that will also do 3 mortal wounds. And so the wounded Nurgling Swarm is removed, and a second Nurgling Swarm goes down to 2 wounds left. Finally, Bolt of Change, which has a warp charge value of 8, and he fails with a 5. Since it's now the end of the Tzeentch Turn 1 Psychic phase, Tzeentch will use 1 command point, going from 4 down to 3 left, in order to use the stratagem Magical Boon. Use this stratagem at the end of your Psychic phase, select a Tzeentch Demon Psyker from your army. It can immediately attempt to manifest 1 additional Psychic power this turn. And so the target will be Kairos Fateweaver, who will attempt to cast Gaze of Fate. Gaze of Fate has a warp charge value of 6, and he gets it with a 10. So Tzeentch will have 1 free dice reroll later this turn. Going into the shooting phase, we will start with this squad of pink horrors, which will fire at the wounded Demon Prince right here, since it is the closest visible enemy unit. There are 7 models in the unit, 14 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 6 hits, wounding on 6s, and getting 1 wound. One 3-up armor save, which passes. Next, this Soul Grinder will fire everything it has into the Chaos Land Raider. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. Then the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 2 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 4, and it wounds. Minus 2 AP, so a 4-up armor save, which fails, and it does an automatic 3 damage. So the Land Raider will drop from 16 starting wounds down to 13 left. And now the other Soul Grinder of Tzeentch will shoot the same Chaos Land Raider. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. Now the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 5 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 4s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up armor saves, and both fail, so that's 6 damage. And so the Chaos Land Raider will drop from 13 wounds down to 7 left. And so going into the assault phase of Tzeentch turn 1, there are 2 charges to declare. First is Magnus will declare charge onto Mortarion. And the second charge will be this Lord of Change charging the wounded Demon Prince. And so we will start with Magnus onto Mortarion. So Mortarion is going to overwatch with his Phosphex bombs, which does 2d6 shots, getting 7 shots. Hitting on 6s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. Not that it matters, but charge distance from Magnus. He gets 3 inches. So Magnus will now be locked in combat with Mortarion. And now for the Lord of Change, there is no overwatch from the Demon Prince, and the Lord of Change is about 5.5 inches away, but because he is charging through a crater, he will need 7 inches to make it within an inch. And so here's the charge distance, getting a 5. And Tzeentch is going to use 1 command point, going from 3 down to 2 left, to use a command reroll in order to reroll that 2. And here's the reroll, still just getting a 2. So then, Tzeentch will use their 1 reroll from Gaze of Fate in order to reroll the 3. And they really need at least a 5. And they don't get it, so that is a failed charge. So, because the Lord of Change failed his charge, this means that the only fight that we have to resolve is Magnus versus Mortarion. And so Magnus will strike first. So Magnus has 7 attacks base, with his Blade of Magnus hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s thanks to himself, and getting 1 re-roll, so 7 hits. Thanks to the +1 strength from Boon of Change, which makes him strength 9 base, his Blade of Magnus multiplies that by 2, so strength 18 versus toughness 7 means 2s to wound, and getting 5 wounds. And Magnus has no rerolls on his wound rolls, so just 5 wounds. Minus 4 AP, and because Mortarion has been death hexed this turn, he will not have an invulnerable save, so no save at all, which means all 5 wounds go through, and they do 3 damage apiece, so that is 15 damage. So 15 disgustingly resilient rolls, and he gets 3, failing 12. So that will drop Mortarion from 17 wounds down to 5 left. And before I forget, we do need to roll for Mortarion's Host of Plagues, and when it would have gone off, he still would have had 17 wounds left. So needing a 4-up, and he does get it, and we only roll 1 dice because Mortarion is only within 7 inches of 1 enemy unit, and that is Magnus. So D3 mortal wounds onto Magnus, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. And so Magnus the Red will go from 18 starting wounds down to 16. So Mortarion, with 5 wounds left, has 5 attacks base using Silence, and he will use Eviscerating Blow, hitting on 2s, getting 5 hits. Wounding on 2s, and re-rolling thanks to being a plague weapon. So 2 re-rolls, getting 5 wounds. 5 4-up invulnerable saves. Passes 2 and fails 3. And these do d6 damage apiece, so 3 d6 damage. And only gets 7 damage. So the Death Guard are going to use 1 command point, going from 5 down to 4 in order to re-roll the 1. And here's the reroll, bringing them up to 8 damage. So that will drop Magnus from 16 wounds down to 8 left. So now Mortarion's Attendants, Claws, and Teeth will go. D6 attacks, getting only 1 attack, hitting on a 2, rerolling 1s, and he gets a hit. Wounding on a 6. Fails to wound, but thanks to his Warlord trait, he gets to re-roll since it's a plague weapon, and he still fails to wound. So Magnus and Mortarion will remain locked in combat, and there is nothing to resolve in the morale phase, so that is the end of Tzeentch turn 1. So, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch did successfully secure Objective 2 for 1 victory point, they successfully secured Objective 5 for 1 victory point, and they successfully secured Objective 6 for 1 victory point. And so, at the end of Tzeentch turn 1, the score currently sits at 3 victory points for Tzeentch and 1 victory point for the Death Guard. Going into Death Guard turn 2, a reminder that the Death Guard have 4 command points left, and Tzeentch has 2 command points left. Also a reminder that the Death Guard held on to overwhelming firepower from the previous turn. And so they draw 2 new tactical objective cards, first of which is Secure Objective 4, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 4 is right here, currently being held by this squad of Nurgling Swarms, so that is a guaranteed point. And Area Denial. Score 1 victory point if there are no enemy models within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn. If there are no enemy models within 12 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And that's a guaranteed D3 victory points because none of the Tzeentch models that were in the middle of their deployment zone moved up the board, and so there are no enemy models within 12 inches of the center of the board at this time. Going into the movement phase of Death Guard turn 2, this squad of Nurgling Swarms is going to remain still. This Land Raider is going to remain still. This Plague Burst Crawler will also remain still. This squad of Nurgling Swarms will remain still. Mortarion is going to remain locked in combat. This fully healthy Demon Prince is going to move back a little bit to be just over an inch away from Magnus. Then this Demon Prince, the one that's down to 5 wounds, will move 12 inches up the board to be closer to the pink horrors. And so this Demon Prince will end up right here, just over an inch away from those pink horrors. So going into the Psychic phase, this Demon Prince is going to attempt to manifest Curse of the Leper onto this squad of pink horrors. Curse of the Leper has a warp charge value of 7. And fails with a 6. So the Death Guard will drop from 4 command points down to 3 left in order to use a command reroll to reroll the 1. And looking for at least a 2, and they pass with a 9. So the Lord of Change will attempt to deny the Witch with +2, and he does deny with the 12. So Curse the Leper does not go off. Next, this Demon Prince will attempt to manifest Smite onto Magnus the Red, needing at least a 5, and gets it with a 10. So Magnus the Red will attempt to deny the Witch, and he does with a 13. Of course. Mortarion is going to attempt to manifest Miasma of Pestilence and Blades of Putrefaction onto himself. Starting with Miasma of Pestilence, which has a warp charge value of 6, and he gets it with an 8. The Lord of Change will use his second Deny the Witch in order to attempt to deny this, and fails with a 7. So now Mortarion will attempt to manifest Blades of Putrefaction onto himself, and he needs a 5, and he gets it with a 7. So now Magnus will attempt to deny the Witch on this, and he does with an 8. So Blades of Putrefaction does not go off. So going into the shooting phase, for Death Guard turn 2, the Death Guard will start by using the stratagem Nurgle's Rot for 3 command points, which will take them from 3 command points down to 0 left. This stratagem can be used once per battle in the shooting phase. Select a friendly Death Guard character and roll a d6 for every unit within 7 inches of them. On a 4-up, the unit being rolled for suffers d3 mortal wounds. Nurgle models cannot suffer wounds from Nurgle's Rot. In fact, they find it rather refreshing. And Mortarion will be the chosen target of this, which means that the only unit that can actually take mortal wounds will be Magnus. And so here's the dice roll, needing a 4-up, and he gets it with a 5. So it will do d3 mortal wounds, and it'll only do 1 mortal wound. But that will drop Magnus from 8 wounds down to 7 left. And so now in the shooting phase, Mortarion is going to shoot Magnus with the lantern. Since it is a pistol weapon, hitting on a 2, and it hits. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which passes. So now the Chaos Land Raider is going to shoot everything that it has into Kairos Fateweaver. Starting with the Combi Bolter, 2 shots hitting on 4s, now that he's down to 7 wounds, and both fail to hit. Now the Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. So Kairos will drop from 13 wounds down to 12 left. So now 4 shots from the 2 twin last cannons hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. 2 d6 damage, and it will do 6 damage. And so Kairos Fateweaver will drop from 12 wounds down to 6 left. This Plague Burst Crawler, which did not move, is going to shoot its Plague Burst Mortar into Kairos Fateweaver, because he cannot see Kairos Fateweaver, but the Plague Burst Mortar can attack units that the Plague Burst Crawler cannot see. Then it will shoot its Heavy Slugger into this squad of Pink Horrors, and it will shoot its 2 Entropy Cannons into the Blue Soul Grinder. So, starting with D6 shots from the Plague Burst Mortar, getting 5 shots. Hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound and 1 reroll, thanks to being a plague weapon. And here's the reroll, getting a 2nd wound. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. Now for the Heavy Slugger into the Pink Horrors, 4 shots hitting on 4s, getting only 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. Finally, the 2 Entropy Cannons into the Soul Grinders. 2 shots hitting on 4s, and both fail to hit. Going into the Assault phase for Death Guard turn 2, this Demon Prince will declare a charge onto this squad of Pink Horrors, and this Demon Prince will declare a charge onto Magnus. And we'll start with this one, because there is no Overwatch and he's just over an inch away, so he will automatically make it into combat. But then we will resolve the Overwatch here. 14 shots hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. And wounding on a 6. Fails to wound. Not that it matters, but charge distance, 7 inches. And so this Demon Prince will make it into combat. So there are a couple things that need to be rolled for at the beginning of the fight phase, but once the appropriate things have been rolled for, then we will begin with the Demon Prince striking Magnus. So first we need to resolve Mortarian's Host of Plagues, which now needs a 5-up. And it gets a 5-up. So it will cause D3 mortal wounds onto Magnus, and it will cause 3 mortal wounds. And so Magnus will drop from 7 wounds down to 4 left. And so now we need to roll for the Locus of Trickery from Tzeentch, because those Pink Horrors are within 6 inches of the Lord of Change. So this Locus of Trickery is technically going on to the Lord of Change, but it will affect the Pink Horrors. So we roll 2 dice, take away the highest, and until the end of that phase, each time your opponent targets a Tzeentch demon unit within 6 inches of a friendly model with the Locus of Trickery and makes a hit roll that after rerolls but before modifiers matches your remaining dice result, that hit roll fails. So the Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings will not be able to hit with 4s against the Pink Horrors. So, but now we will resolve the Demon Prince's attacks onto Magnus. 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and getting 7 hits. Magnus has -1 toughness because of his proximity to Mortarion, so wounding on 3s. Not that that mattered. Getting 6 wounds. 6 4-up invulnerable saves, and he passes 3, but fails 3. And they are 2 damage apiece, so that is 6 damage. And so even if Tzeentch re-rolled one of them and successfully passed using a command point, Magnus would still suffer 4 damage, which means Magnus is killed off. And that is first blood. And so then Mortarion will consolidate up a couple of inches, and the Demon Prince will consolidate up a couple of inches. And so then finally we will resolve this combat between the Demon Prince and the Pink Horrors. And the Demon Prince will strike first, 7 attacks with his 2 sets of Malefic Talents, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, getting 1 reroll, And 4s, because of the locus of trickery, do not hit. So 1 4 is removed, but still getting 6 hits. Wounding on 2s, and getting 5 wounds. 5 4-up and vulnerable saves. Ooh, and they fail all 5, getting a lot of 3s. And so 5 pink horrors will go down. But the 2 remaining will now pile in and attack back. Thanks to the iridescent horror, they have 3 attacks total, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 6, and fails to wound. And so going into the morale phase, that unit of pink horrors is the only squad that needs to take a morale check, and they did lose 5 models. However, they are still within 6 inches of the Lord of Change, which is a greater demon, and so they get to use the Lord of Change's leadership of 10. But because they lost 5 models, they still lose by 1. And so the 1 regular pink horror will be killed off, leaving only the iridescent horror alive from this squad. So now taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they failed to complete overwhelming firepower since they did not kill an enemy unit in the shooting phase. They did, however, successfully secure objective 4 for 1 victory point, and they successfully completed area denial, and there are no enemy units within 12 inches of the center of the board, so they get D3 victory points for that. And so here's the roll, just getting a 1. And so now at the end of Death Guard turn 2, thanks to achieving First Blood, the Death Guard have 4 victory points, and Tzeentch has 3 victory points. So going into Tzeentch turn 2, a reminder that Tzeentch has 2 command points left, and the Death Guard have 0 command points left. And because Tzeentch was able to successfully achieve all 3 of the tactical objective cards from the previous turn, they get to draw 3 new ones this turn. Starting with Domination, score D3 plus 3 victory points if you control every objective marker on the battlefield at the end of your turn. Big Game Hunter, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy unit with the wounds characteristic of 10 or more was destroyed during this turn. If at least 1 enemy unit with the wounds characteristic of 20 or more was destroyed this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And the Glory of Khorne, score 1 victory point if an enemy character was destroyed during this turn. If an enemy character was destroyed by one of your Khorne demon units during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. So going into the movement phase, this squad of pink horrors will remain still. This blue soul grinder will remain still. This squad of pink horrors will remain still. The silver soul grinder will remain still. This iridescent horror is going to fall back out of combat with the demon prince. Right to there, over an inch away and out of combat with the demon prince, but still within 3 inches and therefore controlling objective marker 6. Kairos Fate Weaver is going to move 12 inches up the board towards the Death Guard. And since Kairos Fate Weaver is down to only 6 wounds left, he actually can only move up to 8 inches, and so he will move right to here in order to attempt to charge those Nurgling swarms. So finally, this Lord of Change is going to reposition itself up to 12 inches in order to better engage the Demon Princes of Nurgle. So the Lord of Change will finish its movement here, and it is slightly closer to this Demon Prince, the Wounded One. He's about half an inch further away from this Demon Prince, which is fully healthy, but he is still just under 4 inches away from the fully healthy Demon Prince, so if he wants to charge that Demon Prince, he will need a 3-inch charge, because he is no longer charging through a crater. So going into the Psychic phase, for Tzeentch turn 2, Tzeentch will use their last 2 command points, going from 2 down to 0, in order to use the stratagem Locus of Conjuration. Use this stratagem at the start of your Psychic phase, select a Tzeentch demon character from your army. Until the end of the phase, you can reroll any failed Psychic tests made for friendly Tzeentch demon units within 6 inches of that model. And so the Lord of Change will be the target for that stratagem. However, this time, there are no friendly units within 6 inches of him to benefit from that aura. So just he will be able to reroll failed Psychic tests. But first, we will start with the lone iridescent horror attempting to manifest Smite onto the Demon Prince with 5 wounds left. And looking for a 5 or 6, and fails to get it. So now the Lord of Change will attempt to manifest Smite onto the wounded Demon Prince, needing at least 5, and gets it with a 9. And the Demon Prince that is the target will attempt to deny the Witch, and fails with a 3. So now it will do D3 mortal wounds. It'll do just 1 mortal wound. So now the Demon Prince will fall from 5 wounds down to 4 left. And now the Lord of Change will cast Bolt of Change into the Demon Prince. And Bolt of Change has a warp charge value of 8. He fails with a 5, but he gets to re-roll thanks to the stratagem. Looking for an 8, and still fails, only getting 7 after the Psychic Test bonus. So now Kairos Fateweaver is going to attempt to manifest Smite onto this squad of Nurglings. Looking for a 5, and gets a 10 thanks to his Psychic Test bonus, which means it is still only worth 3 mortal wounds. So, D3 mortal wounds, it will do 3, however. And so the wounded Nurgling swarm loses its 2 wounds, and the one remaining Nurgling will go down to 3 wounds left. Now Kairos will attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate, which means it links to 6, and it fails with a 4. And so finally, Kairos will attempt to manifest Boon of Change onto himself, which needs a 7, and fails with a 6. So going into the shooting phase for Tzeentch turn 2, the Silver Soul Grinder is going to fire first, and it will shoot everything it has into this wounded Demon Prince, because it is actually the closest visible enemy unit, as it is just over 18 inches away, and the next closest visible enemy unit, which is the Chaos Land Raider, is just over 19 inches away. So the Soul Grinder can see and is closest to the Demon Prince, so he will fire at the Demon Prince. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots hitting on 4s. Getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound, 1 4-up armor save, which passes. Then D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, doing 5 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s. Next, the Iridescent Horror is going to shoot the Demon Prince of Nurgle. 2 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 6s, and fails to wound. Then, finally, this Soul Grinder is going to shoot everything it has into the Chaos Land Raider. Starting with the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 1 shot, hitting on a 4, and it hits, wounding on a 4, fails to wound. Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. So now, going into the assault phase, Kairos Fateweaver will declare a charge onto this lone Nurgling swarm. And this Lord of Change is going to charge the wounded Demon Prince, needing a 3-inch charge. So, starting with the Lord of Change onto the Demon Prince, and he gets 7 inches of charge. And so now the Lord of Change is in combat with the Demon Prince. So now Kairos Fateweaver will charge the Nurgling swarm, and he is just over 6 inches away, which means he needs to roll 6 or higher to make it within an inch. He rolls a 7 as well. And so Kairos Fateweaver is now in combat with the Nurgling swarm, and we will resolve this combat first. Since Kairos is down to 6 wounds, he only has 3 attacks based with his Staff of Tomorrow, hitting on 3s, and getting 3 hits, wounding on 2s, and getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, fails 2, passes 1. And the Nurgling swarm is not able to take disgustingly resilient saves against this because it is not a damage characteristic of 1, it is a damage characteristic of D6. And so as long as Kairos does not roll double 1s here, that Nurgling swarm is removed. And he kills it with 7 damage. And so this Nurgling swarm is killed off. And that is the first full unit that Tzeentch has killed this game. And so now Kairos will consolidate a couple of inches, and he will end up here. And so now we will do the combat between the Lord of Change and the Demon Prince of Nurgle. But first, I think I forgot to give him a disgustingly resilient roll for losing the wound in the psychic phase, so here's that roll, and he does not get it. So if I forgot to roll for his disgustingly resilient, I apologize, but he would not have saved the wound. So, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword has 5 attacks base since he's at full health, and he will attack with his Baleful Sword. So 5 attacks hitting on 3s, and getting 5 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 3 wounds. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and passes 2 of them. But it does D6 damage, and it only does 2 damage. 2 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, and fails both. And so the Demon Prince will drop from 4 wounds left down to 2. And now the Demon Prince will get to attack back. Demon Prince of Nurgle attacking back, 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, and getting 6 hits. With 1 re-roll, getting 7 hits. Wounding on 4s, and getting 3 wounds. 3 up invulnerable saves, and passes 2, failing 1. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will drop from 16 starting wounds down to 14 left. And so going into the morale phase, there are no morale tests to take. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch failed to get Domination, and they're going to throw that one away. Tzeentch failed to get Big Game Hunter, and they also failed to get the Glory of Khorne, but they have to hold on to those because they can only throw 1 card away per turn, and this is the mission kill confirmed, and so cards where you need to kill an enemy unit cannot be thrown away for any reason unless they're impossible to achieve, and both of those are possible still. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 2, the score currently sits at 3 victory points for Tzeentch and 4 victory points for the Death Guard. Going into Death Guard turn 3, a reminder that the Death Guard have 0 command points left, and Tzeentch also has 0 command points left. Also, a reminder that the Death Guard are still holding on to overwhelming firepower, which means they needed to draw 2 new tactical objective cards, and they drew behind enemy lines. Score 1 victory point if you have at least 1 unit completely within the enemy's deployment zone at the end of your turn. If you have at least 3 units within your opponent's deployment zone at the end of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Master the Warp. Score 1 victory point if you manifested or denied a psychic power during this turn. If you manifested or denied 3 or more psychic powers, score D3 victory points instead. So going into the movement phase, this Plague Burst Crawler will remain still. This Land Raider is going to move 5 inches up the board, and it will finish its movement right here. This squad of Nurgling Swarms will remain still. Mortarion is going to move 10 inches up the board, and he will finish his movement right here. Now this Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings will move up the board 12 inches, and it will finish its movement here just over an inch away from the Lord of Change. And now this Demon Prince, the wounded one with 2 wounds left, will fall out of combat with the Lord of Change into the Tzeentch deployment zone up to 12 inches. And it will fall back over to here. So now going into the Psychic phase, this Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings, the one that fell back, is going to attempt to manifest Smite onto the lone Iridescent Horror. Looking for a 5, and gets it with an 8. So the Lord of Change will attempt to deny the Witch, and he fails with a 7. And not that it matters, because there's only 1 wound in the squad left, but it does 1 mortal wound. And so this lone Iridescent Horror is killed off. And so now this Demon Prince will attempt to manifest Smite onto the Lord of Change, looking for at least a 5, and fails with a 4. So finally, Mortarion will attempt to manifest Miasma of Pestilence and Blades of Putrefaction onto himself. Starting with Miasma of Pestilence, which has a warp charge value of 6, and he fails with a 3. And so then Blades of Putrefaction, which has a warp charge value of 5, and he gets it with a 6. The Lord of Change can attempt to deny the Witch one more time, needing at least a 7, and fails with a 6. So Blades of Putrefaction will go off. So going into the shooting phase, we will start with Mortarion firing the Lantern at the Lord of Change, hitting on a 2, and fails to hit. However, he gets to re-roll failed hit rolls of 1, thanks to himself. So he gets a hit, wounding on a 3, and fails to wound. So now this Plague Burst Crawler is going to fire everything that it has into Kairos Fateweaver, starting with the 2 Entropy Cannons, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails, and it does d6 damage. It will do 2 damage. So the Warlord Kairos will drop from 6 wounds down to 4. Next will be the Heavy Slugger, 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which passes. And finally, the Plague Burst Mortar actually can't shoot Kairos because it can't shoot units that are closer than 12 inches. So because of that, the Plague Burst Mortar is going to target something else. And it will target this squad of pink horrors all the way over here on objective marker 5. So D6 shots. Getting 6 shots, of course. Hitting on 4s and getting 3 hits. Wounding on 2s. getting 2 wounds. 2, 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And so 1 pink horror will be removed. Finally, this Land Raider is going to shoot both of its twin last cannons into Kairos Fateweaver, and it will shoot its twin heavy bolter and its combi bolter into the pink horror squad that the Plagueburst Crawler fired its mortar into. Starting with the combi bolter, which is just within 24-inch range, so 2 shots, hitting on 3s, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound, 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so 1 more pink horror will be removed, leaving 8 left. And now the twin heavy bolter, 6 shots hitting on 4s, only getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes both. And now for the 2 twin last cannons onto Kairos Fateweaver, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and fails both. And these do d6 damage apiece, and that will be 11 damage, which is plenty of overkill to finish off the 4 remaining wounds on Kairos Fateweaver, and the Warlord is killed off. Going into the assault phase, we have 2 charges to declare. The first is Mortarion declaring a charge onto the Lord of Change, and the second is the fully healthy Demon Prince of Nurgle declaring a charge onto the Lord of Change. There's no Overwatch, so we will start by rolling for Mortarion. So Mortarion needs only a 3-inch charge to make it in, and he makes it with a 6. So Mortarion will now be locked in combat with the Lord of Change. The Demon Prince is charging through a crater, and so because of that, since he is just over an inch away, he needs to roll a 3 or higher to make it in as well, and he does with an 8. And so the fully healthy Demon Prince is now in combat with the Lord of Change. So going into the fight phase, we first have Mortarion's Host of Plagues, which fails to go off. And then we need to roll for the Loci of Trickery on Tzeentch. And so hit rolls of 1 will not count as hit rolls, which already don't. So that was worthless. So we will start in the fight phase with Mortarion. He has 5 attacks base since he's at 5 wounds. He will use all 5 with the Eviscerating Blow from Silence onto the Lord of Change. And we need to remember that he did successfully get off Blades of Putrefaction. But 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s thanks to himself, and a good thing since he rolled 3 1s. And here's the rerolls, and so getting 5 hits. Wounding on 2s with 6s, causing automatic mortal wounds, and no automatic mortal wounds, but getting 5 wounds. Thanks to the Impossible Robe, 5 3-up invulnerable saves, and only fails 1. And it will do d6 damage, and it will do 4 damage. So the Lord of Change will drop from 14 wounds down to 10 left. And now Mortarion's Attendant's Claws and Teeth will attack. D6 attacks, 2 attacks, hitting on 2s, getting 1 reroll, and here's the reroll. Getting 2 hits, wounding on 6s, rerolling everything. Getting 1 6, which also causes automatic mortal wounds, and rerolling the 5, which also becomes a 6. And thanks to Blades of Putrefaction, I do know that a 5 counts as a wound because you add 1 to the wound rolls. However, rerolls happen before modifiers, and so that 5 has to be rerolled, unfortunately, thanks to his Warlord trait of rerolling everything when it comes to plague weapons. So unfortunately, that rerolling that 5 could have meant that he would have lost out on an additional wound, but in this case, it worked out better. So that is 2 automatic mortal wounds onto the Lord of Change. And so the Lord of Change will drop from 10 wounds left down to 8. And then finally 2 3-up invulnerable saves. And passes both. And now the Demon Prince will attack, since he also charged. 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s. That's a lot of 6s. Not that that does anything for Demon Princes of Nurgle. So 7 hits. The Lord of Change is -1 toughness thanks to Mortarion, so wounding on 3s. And getting 7 wounds. 7 3-up invulnerable saves. Passes 3 and fails 4. And so that is 8 damage. And because of that, the Lord of Change is dead if he takes that 8 damage. So he will use the Impossible Robe in order to reroll one of those 2s. And either way, whether it fails again, rolls a 1, if he doesn't save it, he's dead. And he does save it. So he only takes 6 damage. And so the Lord of Change will fall from 8 wounds down to 2 left. But now the Lord of Change will get to strike back, and he will attack Mortarion. And actually, because even with the Baleful Sword, he's only strength 7, the Lord of Change is going to attack the Demon Prince instead. Since he's down to 2 wounds, he only has 3 attacks base. So with the Baleful Sword, 3 attacks hitting on 3s and getting 3 hits, wounding on 3s. And of course, would have gotten 2 wounds on Mortarion, but getting 3 wounds on the Demon Prince. 3 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 2. And these do d6 damage apiece for a total of 10 damage. 10 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 3 and fails 7. Which means that the Demon Prince will survive with 1 wound left. And so going into the morale phase, this squad of pink horrors lost 2 models this turn, and therefore it's the only unit that needs to take a morale test. And here's the morale test roll, getting a 5, which does pass since they have a leadership of 7, and so they will not lose any more models. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Death Guard did complete overwhelming firepower for 1 victory point, thanks to killing off Kairos Fateweaver, which also gave them Slay the Warlord, but that was the only unit killed in the shooting phase, so it's only worth 1 victory point. They did complete behind enemy lines for 1 victory point, thanks to the Demon Prince with 2 wounds, falling back into the Tzeentch deployment zone, but only 1 Death Guard unit is within the Tzeentch deployment zone, so that's also only worth 1 victory point. And finally, Master the War is worth 1 victory point to them, since they only manifested 2 psychic powers. And so at the end of Death Guard turn 3, the score currently sits at 8 victory points for the Death Guard and 3 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 3, a reminder that they held on to Big Game Hunter and the Glory of Corn from the previous turn. And they also draw Secure Objective 4. Score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 4 is this one right here, currently being held by this squad of Nurgling Swarms. So going into the movement phase of Tzeentch turn 3, we will start with this squad of 8 pink horrors, which is going to move up the board towards the Death Guard 6 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting 5 additional inches for 11 inches of total movement. And so they will finish their movement right here. This blue Soul Grinder will remain still. This squad of 10 pink horrors is going to move up the board 6 inches, and they will all finish their movement right here. This silver Soul Grinder will remain still. And finally, the Lord of Change, which is now down to 2 wounds, is going to fall back out of combat up to 6 inches away. And he will fall back to here, and this Demon Prince, the one that's down to 2 wounds left, is the closest visible enemy unit for the purpose of targeting Smite. So now, going into the Psychic phase, we will start with the Lord of Change casting Smite onto this Demon Prince of Nurgle. Has a Warp Charge value of 5, and fails with a 4, and he no longer has a Psychic test bonus. So now the Lord of Change will attempt to cast Bolt of Change onto the same Demon Prince, which needs at least an 8, and fails with a 7. This squad of 8 pink horrors is going to attempt to cast Smite onto this Chaos Land Raider, looking for a 5 or 6, and gets the 5. And there are no Psychers within 24 inches out on the table, so there are no Deny the Witch tests to take. So that will do 1 automatic mortal wound onto the Chaos Land Raider. And so that will drop the Chaos Land Raider from 7 wounds down to 6. And so now the full squad of 10 pink horrors will also attempt to manifest Smite onto the same Chaos Land Raider, looking for a 5 or 6, and they fail with a 4. This blue Soul Grinder, going to the shooting phase, is going to fire everything it has into the Warlord Mortarion, starting with the Harvester Cannon. 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 4, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails, and it does D3 damage, and it will do 2 damage. 2 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, and fails both. So Mortarion will drop from 5 wounds down to 3 left. And now the Phlegm Bombardment will do D6 shots, getting 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1, and it does an automatic 3 damage, so 3 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, and he fails 2, passes 1. And so Mortarion will drop from 3 wounds remaining down to 1 left. And so then this Soul Grinder, the Silver Soul Grinder, will also shoot everything he has into Mortarion. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots hitting on 4s. All fail to hit. Now D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment does 6 shots. Hitting on 4s and getting 4 hits. Wounding on 3s. Getting 3 wounds. 3 4-up invulnerable saves. Passes 1 and fails 2. They are 3 damage apiece, so 6 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls. And he passed 5 of them and only failed the 1 needed to kill him. But that will cause 1 damage to go through, which will take off the last remaining wound on Mortarion. And so we have to roll a dice for his putrid demise. So on a 4-up, he explodes, and he does not explode. And this means that the Warlord Mortarion is killed off. Next, this squad of pink horrors, they are all within 18 inches of the Chaos Land Raider, so they will all shoot 20 shots hitting on 4s and getting 10 hits. Wounding on 6s and getting 4 wounds, 4 2-up armor saves, and fails 2 of them. So the Chaos Land Raider will drop from 6 wounds down to 4 left. And finally, this squad of 8 pink horrors will also shoot the Land Raider because they are all within 18 inches, and since they are armed with assault weapons, they can fire even though they advanced. 16 shots hitting on 5s, getting 6 hits, wounding on 6s, getting 1 6, 1 2-up armor save, which passes. Going into the assault phase, there are no charges to declare. There's nothing to resolve in the fight phase, since there are no ongoing combats, and there are no morale tests to take. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch does get 1 victory point for Big Game Hunter, thanks to killing Mortarion, which also gives them 1 victory point for the Glory of Khorne. However, they failed to secure Objective 4, and they will throw that one away, since it is in the Death Guard deployment zone. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 3, the score currently sits at 6 victory points for Tzeentch and 8 victory points for the Death Guard. Going into Death Guard turn 4, the Death Guard needed to draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and they drew Symbol of the Fly Lord. Score D3 victory points if you control exactly 3 objective markers at the end of your turn, no more, no less. Defend Objective 3, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 3 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Objective Marker 3 is right here, currently being held by this Plague Burst Crawler. And Psychological Warfare, score 1 victory point if your opponent failed a morale test during this turn. If your opponent failed 3 or more morale tests, score D3 victory points instead. So going into the movement phase, this squad of Nurglings will remain still. This Plague Burst Crawler will remain still. The various units inside of this Chaos Land Raider are going to disembark out this direction. And they will finish their disembarkation like so. Next, the Plague Marines are going to move up the board 5 inches. And here's where the Plague Marines ended up. Next, the Tallyman will move up the board 5 inches, finishing its movement there. Now the Malignant Plaguecaster will move up, finishing its movement there. And finally, the Plague Surgeon will move up, finishing its movement there. Now the Chaos Land Raider is going to move up the board up to 3 inches, and it will finish its movement here. This Demon Prince, with 2 wounds left, is going to move up to 12 inches over to here. And it will finish its movement right here, just over an inch away from this Lord of Change. And then finally, this Demon Prince of Nurgle is going to move 12 inches up the board. And it will finish its movement right here, very wobbly, sitting on this ruin. But for all intents and purposes, he is about just over 3 inches away from this Soul Grinder, which means he would need to roll a 3-inch charge in order to make it into combat if he wished to do so. So now, going into the Psychic phase, this Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings will manifest Smite onto the Lord of Change. needing at least a 5, and gets it with an 8. The Lord of Change will attempt to deny the witch, and he fails with the 6. And it does D3 mortal wounds, and it only does 1 mortal wound. And so the Lord of Change will drop from 2 remaining wounds down to 1 left. So now this Demon Prince will attempt to manifest Smite onto this Soul Grinder, needing at least a 5, and gets it with a 5. The Lord of Change is within range to attempt to deny the witch, and he does so with an 11. The Malignant Plaguecaster is going to attempt to manifest Putrescent Vitality onto the Plague Marines, which has a warp charge value of 6, and he gets it with an 8. So those Plague Marines are now +1 strength and toughness. The Malignant Plaguecaster is then going to attempt to manifest Smite onto this squad of 8 pink horrors. The squads are equidistant to the Malignant Plaguecaster, and so he gets to choose which one of the 2 he wants to fire at, so he will fire at the smaller squad, looking for at least a 5, and gets it with a 7. We'll do D3 mortal wounds, and of course it'll do 3 mortal wounds. So 3 pink horrors are removed. So now going into the shooting phase, these units here are going to fire their various pistol weapons into the smaller squad of pink horrors. They will fire them one at a time. There's 1 plasma pistol and 3 separate bolt pistols. Starting with the plasma pistol, firing the standard shot, hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 2, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so 1 pink horror will go down. Bolt pistol from the Plague Champion, hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so another pink horror will go down. Bolt pistol from the Plague Surgeon, hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which passes. And finally, the bolt pistol from the Malignant Plaguecaster, hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so 1 more pink horror will go down. And I realize it's slightly out of order, but we'll go back and do it. The Plague Marines are going to toss a crack grenade onto the pink horrors as well. So 1 crack grenade, hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 2, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And so the final regular pink horror will go down. So now, the Plague Burst Crawler is going to fire, and it will fire its Plague Burst Mortar into the Lord of Change across the map because he is within 48 inches, and he doesn't have to see the target. It will fire its Heavy Slugger into the squad of 10 pink horrors, and it will fire its 2 Entropy Cannons into the blue Soul Grinder. So, starting with the Plague Burst Mortar, D6 shots, getting 2 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 3-up invulnerable saves, and fails 1. And they do D3 wounds apiece, but it does not matter because the Lord of Change is down to 1 wound left. And the Lord of Change can only attempt the reroll from the Impossible Robe once per game, and he already used it in the previous fight phase, so this Lord of Change is killed off. So now the Heavy Slugger into the pink horrors, 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and they fail both. And so 2 pink horrors will go down. Now for the 2 Entropy Cannons into the Soul Grinder, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails, and it does D6 damage, and it will do 3 damage. And so the blue Soul Grinder will drop from 14 starting wounds down to 11. And so then this Land Raider is going to fire its Combi Bolter and its Twin Heavy Bolter into the pink horrors, which are within 12-inch rapid fire range for the Combi Bolter, and it will fire its 2 Twin Last Cannons into the blue Soul Grinder. And so, starting with the Combi Bolter, 4 shots in rapid fire range, hitting on 5s, and all fail to hit. Now for the Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots, hitting on 5s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. So now for the 2 Twin Last Cannons onto the blue Soul Grinder, 4 shots, hitting on 5s, and getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and both pass. So going into the assault phase, there are 2 charges to declare. First is this Demon Prince declaring a charge onto the Soul Grinder, and second will be the Plague Marines declaring a charge onto the Pink Horrors. We will start with the Demon Prince onto the Soul Grinder. Starting first with Overwatch from the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots hitting on 6s. All fail to hit. Then the Phlegm Bombardment, D6 shots, getting 1 shot. Hitting on a 6, fails to hit. Needs a 3-inch charge, and more than gets it, with an 8. So now the Demon Prince of Nurgle is locked in combat with the Soul Grinder. Now for the Plague Marines charging the Pink Horrors, there are 8 models left with 2 shots apiece for 16 shots of Overwatch, hitting on 6s, with 1 cocked dice, and getting 3 6s. Thanks to Putrescent Vitality, wounding on 6s, getting 1 wound. 1 3-up armor save, which fails, and 1 disgustingly resilient roll, which also fails. So 1 Plague Marine will go down, and it will be a Plague Marine with a Bubotic Axe. Now for charge distance, getting 8 inches. And so the 6 remaining models in the Plague Marine squad are now in combat with the Pink Horrors, and we will resolve that combat first. And we will start with the 3 Marines that have Bubotic Axes, 2 attacks apiece thanks to being armed with a Bubotic Axe and a Plague Knife, for 6 attacks total, hitting on 3s. And that's a cocked dice. But they are still within 7 inches of the tallyman, so re-rolling failed hit rolls. So 2 re-rolls, getting 6 hits. Strength 5 versus Toughness 3 is 3s to wound. Re-rolling 1s thanks to being a plague weapon. And here's the re-roll, getting 6 wounds. 6 4-up and vulnerable saves, and they fail 4 of them. And so 4 Pink Horrors will go down. Now the 2 Plague Marines with Flails of Corruption, they have 1 attack base, but they get to make D3 attacks instead of 1. So 2 D3 attacks, hitting 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, re-rolling thanks to the Tallyman, getting 3 re-rolls, getting 4 hits. And I do apologize, the Bubotic Axes should have been wounding on 2s. It did not matter because they rolled all 3 ups and then a 1, which got re-rolled to a 4, something like that, but all of them wounded. But the Bubotic Axes add 1, and so does Putrescent Vitality, so it should have been Strength 6 versus Toughness 3, which would have been 2s to wound. Luckily, they all wounded, so that didn't matter, but the Flails of Corruption are plus 2 Strength on top of the Putrescent Vitality, so they are Strength 7 versus Toughness 3, which means 2s to wound. And of course rolling 2 1s, so getting 2 wounds. However, Flails of Corruption are plague weapons, so re-rolling the 1s, and getting 4 wounds. So 4 4-up armor saves, they pass 3 of them, failing 1. However, Flails of Corruption are 2 damage apiece, and the damage does not go to waste after a model is removed. It still gets allocated to another unit, so even though only 1 wound got through, 2 Pink Horrors will be killed off. And so the final regular Pink Horror will be killed off, and then the instrument will be killed off. So then the Plague Champion, with his Power Fist, 2 attacks, hitting on 4s, re-rolling 1s and 2s, and of course getting a 3. Wounding on a 2, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails. And unfortunately for Tzeentch, they have to remove either the icon or the iridescent horror, and in this instance, in order to give them the best chance for survival, they will remove the iridescent horror. This way, if they roll a 1 in the morale phase, they can get D6 models back. And so now the Demon Prince of Nurgle will attack the Soul Grinder. 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, and getting 7 hits. Wounding on 4s, and getting 4 wounds. 4 4-up invulnerable saves, and passes 3 of them. And so the Soul Grinder only takes 2 damage, going from 14 starting wounds down to 12. And now the Soul Grinder will attack back. The Soul Grinder is going to use its Warp Sword so it can re-roll failed hit rolls. Since he's still at 12 wounds, 5 attacks base with the Warp Sword, hitting on 4s. And getting 3 rerolls. And here's the rerolls. Still failing to hit. Wounding on 3s, and fails to wound. So finally, that means the 1 Pink Horror will attack back onto the Plague Marines, hitting on a 4, and fails to hit, of course. So going into the morale phase, the Plague Marines lost 1 model this turn. However, it is impossible for them to fail a morale check after only losing 1 model, since the champion has a leadership of 8. Unfortunately for Tzeentch, however, they sort of have the opposite story. This squad of pink horrors lost 7 models this turn and only have 1 left. And since they only have a leadership of 7, not only is it impossible for them to pass the morale check, but it will automatically kill off the final model for a failed morale check. And so then finally this squad lost 9 models, but they have an icon. So if they roll a 1 for their morale test, they get D6 models back. Otherwise, that unit is wiped out. And so here's the roll, and of course they roll a 6. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, the Death Guard did complete Symbol of the Fly Lord, as the Plague Burst Crawler is sitting on an objective, the Nurgling Swarms are sitting on an objective, and the Demon Prince that did not charge the Soul Grinder is also sitting on an objective. That was being controlled by a Lord of Change at the beginning of the turn, but the Lord of Change is now dead and therefore uncontesting it. So they get D3 victory points for that. And here's the roll, getting 3 victory points, of course. The Death Guard have not finished defending Objective 3, but they are now 1 turn into doing so. So they will hold on to that. And Tzeentch did fail 2 morale tests. So they did fail Psychological Warfare, but because they only failed 2, it's only worth 1 victory point. And so, at the end of Death Guard turn 4, the score currently sits at 12 victory points for the Death Guard and 6 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 4, Tzeentch needed to draw 3 new tactical objective cards, and so they drew the Dominion of Chaos, score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of your turn. No prisoners, score 1 victory point if an enemy unit was destroyed during your turn. If between 3 and 5 enemy units were destroyed during your turn, score D3 victory points instead. If 6 or more enemy units were destroyed during your turn, score D3 plus 3 victory points instead. And Psychological Warfare, score 1 victory point if your opponent failed a morale test this turn. If your opponent failed 3 or more morale tests, score D3 victory points instead. And so at this point, considering the fact that the only units Tzeentch has left on the board is 2 Soul Grinders, both of which are not at full health, although they're not severely damaged yet, but 2 Soul Grinders not at full health, one of which is already locked in combat with the Demon Prince that refuses to die, Tzeentch is going to concede this game. And so because the game is conceded, that does mean the game is over, and therefore Death Guard will achieve Line Breaker. And so this does mean, since it is the mission kill confirmed, we do have to add in the kill points at the end. And so the final score, after Line Breaker and everything's been added in, is 8 victory points for Tzeentch and 19 for the Death Guard, since Tzeentch only killed off 2 full units on the Death Guard side, and the Death Guard killed off 6 full units on the Tzeentch side. So now that the game is over and the winner has been revealed, the Death Guard win thanks to a concession, but they also slaughtered Tzeentch in terms of victory points at the end, 19-8, which is a huge differential. That's part of the reason why they conceded. I mean, even though they still have 2 mostly healthy Soul Grinders, the likelihood that they were going to come back was very unlikely, considering the fact that Death Guard, they still had a Plague Burst Crawler that was fully healthy, 2 Demon Princes that refused to die, and a squad of Plague Marines with close combat weapons that could possibly mess up those Soul Grinders. The other thing that needs to be pointed out, and we'll take a quick pan here, this is the Tzeentch dead pile. 30 dead pink horrors, a dead Lord of Change, a dead Kairos Fateweaver, and a dead Magnus the Red, versus the Death Guard dead pile. A dead Plague Marine with Bubotic Axe, 3 dead Nurgling Swarms, and of course a dead Mortarion. Now the dead Mortarion is very impressive, but 3 dead Nurgling Swarms and a dead Plague Marine doesn't really even the odds. So yeah, that's the 2 dead piles compared to each other. And so I don't really have much else to say, other than that the game was fairly close up until Tzeentch turn 2. And then in Tzeentch turn 2, everything just went south for Tzeentch. Because game turn 1, both Death Guard and Tzeentch, it was fairly close, fairly neck and neck. Death Guard got 1 victory point, then Tzeentch went up 3-1, then Death Guard achieved 3 victory points, bringing them back up into the lead 4-3. Still fairly close, anyone's game. Both sides had plenty of models left on the table and plenty of full units. It was anyone's game, but then in Tzeentch turn 2, for whatever reason, they failed so many critical dice rolls, especially in their psychic tests. They just could not get anything, which is why there are still 2 Demon Princes for Nurgle alive on the table. It was kind of a mess for Tzeentch at that point. The other thing that really stood out to me that caused problems for Tzeentch was that in Tzeentch turn 1, the Lord of Change failed its 7-inch charge onto a Demon Prince. That also caused massive problems, because obviously if that charge gets made, then Death Guard can't move up as aggressively because they have to deal with 2 monstrous creatures in their closer to their deployment zone in their half of the field. But that failed charge kept Demon Prince alive and was able to then go and engage the Pink Horrors, and it all kind of went down from there. But yeah, so Tzeentch turn 2 is really where I saw this game flip on its head and just run away for the Death Guard favor. Tzeentch had very, very poor luck this game in terms of its dice rolls, especially when it came to psychic tests. I mean, I was quite surprised at how poorly they were rolling for psychic tests later in the game. No one could make anything. Kairos Fateweaver failed multiple psychic tests. Kairos is supposed to be one of the best psychers in the Warhammer universe. Like, how does he fail multiple psychic tests? Like, I could get it if it was like one really difficult one, but he failed Gaze of Fate. How do you fail Gaze of Fate? I don't get it. You know, they had multiple chances to stick in the game. I mean, when the Lord of Change was down to 2 wounds, and he was surrounded by 2 Demon Princes and Mortarion, and he fell back out of combat to use psychic powers, there was a chance that if the dice rolls went their way, both Demon Princes, Mortarion, and the Land Raider all could have been killed that turn. We're talking massive, massive shift. But no, the Lord of Change failed to kill off the Demon Prince with 2 separate psychic powers, and then it took both Soul Grinders shooting Mortarion to finish him off, and they barely finished him off. Like, oh my goodness. 5 passed disgustingly resilient rolls out of 6. That's just crazy. So the dice just really went against Tzeentch, and it's not even like Death Guard had too many amazing rolls. I mean, they had some good rolls, but they didn't have anything that was extraordinary, but Tzeentch just had absolutely awful rolls. So that's what sort of decided this game and caused problems for Tzeentch, and that's pretty much what did it. I still thought it was an interesting first matchup between these 2 armies. After watching this army play out, I have some different ideas of how the next one could play, so it'll be interesting to try a second battle report. I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next one.